Welcome into 365 Sports. Paul Kenlina, Evan Abrams of the Action Network here with us. Evan hopped on last week. He's back again this week because the segment was so awesome. And we know collectively among our group very little about betting. And one day it will be legal in Texas. And I can't, one day off in the future, it might be when there's actual flying cars, but sports betting will be legal. So flying cars and betting on games, can't wait for that day. But we like having this because we have a lot of people, Evan, and I know that you get this probably all the time. People calling you, texting you, people in your regular life. You'll be out at a restaurant and somebody's like, hey, tell me about the Cowboys and Saints this week. And you have to all right, you can go to the website and not have to ask me, but since we're here, is that your life?
I mean, it's mostly being with my wife. I am married, and then asking her what she does for a living, and then someone asks what I do for work, and then it's someone either sparks in the conversation. You see their eyes kind of get wide and be like, "Oh my God, that's cool," and basically the conversation ends 2.5 hours later, or it's someone who really doesn't care about that and it kind of moves on pretty quickly. But yeah, it can get interesting from time to time, let's call it.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's some interesting stuff going here, and Evan's going to educate it. This is last week was not what most people I think would call a banner week for games when you looked at the schedule, but it wound up being a crazy week. And I know money was probably going every which way based on things that happened. If you bet NIU at all, you were probably thrilled. Before we get into this week, what was last week like in that market?
Yeah, so I've learned betting college football and really sports in general through the years that when people think the slate's really lame and things don't happen, you really get the most chaos possible. And entering last week, I'm pretty sure we had talked about this. Double-digit favorites were 89-3. There were really no upsets, and then all of a sudden, it was absolute chaos. You had even Drake beat Eastern Washington on the red turf as 35-point dogs. Northern Illinois, there was all sorts of different upsets. You had, I believe, you had 10 or 11 of them at double digits. So something completely different than we had seen in previous weeks, which is usually how this goes. But yeah, I think the biggest upset that everyone was talking about was the Notre Dame game. It was their biggest loss as a 28-point favorite since 1995 against Northwestern. It had been a long time since they laid that type of egg. I know Marcus Freeman has had his issues lately, losing some of those games, Marshall here and there, but that loss was extra special.
Yeah, that was something else. All right, let's get into the games this week, and then I've got some kind of things thoughts on realignment and just long-term futures for some of the teams that are going up and going down for you. But sure. Tonight, Arizona and Kansas State. Arizona likely to be without their starting running back. There's a very strange eligibility issue about when he was at Alabama State and transferred, and did he really redshirt? How many games did he play in? Kind of a thing. So that's going to affect Arizona, obviously. They're on the road at Kansas State. Technically not a Big 12 game. It's a non-conference game, but their first game in a Big 12 atmosphere on a Friday night in Manhattan that's going to be lit. How is this one playing out?
Yeah, so you kind of mentioned it off the bat, but I feel like it has to be said. Just looking at the slate of all these games this week and seeing the Apple Cup and Civil War and all these games being played in September, truly very odd.
Yeah.
I will say that off the bat. So talking about some of these games and looking at the slate as a whole, very weird. Arizona, Kansas State. Yeah, I mean, at this point, it's a non-conference game where Arizona will officially begin Big 12 play in week 5 against Utah. So it's a little bit of a different team in some different conferences. To me, Josh Baker was a big add on the offensive line. And I think it's something that is going to probably lead to my play, which is the over. I played it at 59. It was open 54.5 up to 60.5 now. So I think you're in a little bit of a maybe wait and see live spot if it starts a little slow. But both teams ranked top 20 in rush explosiveness. Both teams didn't play well last week, so I kind of expect a little bit of a bounce back in terms of point spot. And the only thing I'll say about the game, watch a little bit of wind here. I see about 11 miles an hour a kick, but tapering off as we go. So maybe something that does give you that opportunity to get in on a lower over under.
Okay, there we go. Yeah, this one could get, especially if Tedero McMillan gets going early, like they have a couple big plays, you might think this one can kind of get wild.
I was going to say a prop was interesting. 2+ touchdowns for him is 4-1. I mean, he's averaging 14 targets per game in his last 5 games against FBS opponents. 14 targets a game. So to me I mean, he's NFL ready even before last week. So 2+ touchdowns was interesting at 4-1.
All right. A big game, kind of a seminal moment for UCF in year 2 here, kicking off their Big 12 season with TCU on the road in Fort Worth tomorrow night. Neither of these teams have had real proving ground games yet, although that Stanford game for TCU was dicey early. Obviously, UCF has had 2 warm-up games, and now they get this. This is where we find out who both these teams are at this point in the season. This one looks like there'll be a ton of running the ball and probably some offense, but because neither defense is totally proven either.
Yeah, I'm going to stake my flag in the ground a little bit on this one, but I'll set it up. UCF hasn't really broken a sweat, like you said. New Hampshire, Sam Houston, they've won 102-17. I don't think we really understand what their team is at this point. But I think the thing that probably means more to me is what you mentioned on the ground. KJ Jefferson, RJ Harvey, UCF on the ground to me is probably the answer in this one. Now, Action Network, our projections put this at about a 6-point favorite for UCF. So we are very different than the market here. As TCU opened -3, now down to -1, pick them in a few spots. Bets, money, everyone seems to be on Central Florida, and that's where we are as well. But again, UCF ranks top 10 in numerous rushing categories, line yards, the success rate. It all kind of points me in that direction. TCU hasn't been bad in these home dog, short line home games. I just think their team is different than in previous years. So flag, ground, I'll stake an opportunity here.
Okay, UCF, Orlando, Florida, rejoice. And we have a lot of both. We have a lot of TCU fans. We have a lot of UCF fans. Okay. So that's probably going to move the needle one way or the other among those groups that watch it and go, oh, I'm sure there's TCU people that are like, no, the hell with you, Evan.
I'm going to get some bad messages. I love it. It's okay. No worries. We
UCF fans are like, this guy, smart as hell. Smart as hell.
Nobody's talking about.
Yeah. It's what I've been saying. But one of the more, I love that Bama does this. Bama and Texas and Oklahoma, to me, are the best at scheduling non-conference games and not caring where they wind up on the other side of it. They just know that they're going to go somewhere. They're going to get big TV ratings. They're going to be big recruiting off of it, and they just do it. So Bama has Wisconsin. That is going to be a really loud stadium. They played really sloppy last week against USF. Watching Alex Golesh walk off the field, I think he feels like he lost his opportunity in the third quarter of that game, where they might have been able to turn it and get an upset in Tuscaloosa. I look at it differently. I look at Alabama woke up and started playing well. Tyler Van Dyke's the quarterback in Wisconsin. He is not reliable. This does not seem to be a great matchup for the Badgers, and they were 16 or 16.5 point dogs last I saw.
Yeah.
Is that a number that you think would hold up?
I like certain wagers more than others this week. This one is a little bit frisky for me. It's a little bit different. I don't feel as comfortable, but I'll break down a little bit of a few things I'm looking at here. First of all, I looked at this game and said to myself, just for maybe 20 seconds, 10 seconds, I was like, is this a conference matchup? I was like, no, it's not. It's not. So much is different. I had to be like, is Bama? No, not at all. But yeah, to me, this was even an interesting, I would say, cool game to see on the slate. Alabama doesn't play Wisconsin all the time. And then you kind of look at the fact that, oh, wow, this is also a huge number for Wisconsin at home, which you really don't see at all. So since 2005, Wisconsin's biggest line as a home dog is 14.5. Ohio State last year. Ohio State won the game 24-10. We kind of know how that went. Now, before that game, They were last plus 14 or higher back in 1997 against Michigan. So it has been a long, long time since, it's been this Camp Randall seen this type of number. So I will also say this: past 35 years, Wisconsin 0-11 as a double-digit home dog. So getting all these points, usually the line tends to be right. Now, inside the trenches in the game itself, Alabama's offensive line issues kind of keeps me a little bit away from wanting to lay the number. I think I would do that before I took the points, but run blocking was just bad. It was just 42% of its 38 rushing attempts were stuffed in week 2 against a South Florida team. We didn't think the game would be close. Yeah. So on the other side, though, I think the only bet I could possibly make here is the Wisconsin team total under. I would just make the assumption that Alabama's defense is going to do its job. And that's probably the way I'd go. Money, tickets, all on the Alabama side. Everyone kind of just rolling that direction, assuming they're going to blow them over. But I just don't know how Wisconsin's going to score points. So small wager, back and forth. But the line is probably the biggest story you'll hear about here.
Yeah. There's interesting quarterback situations going on in the next game. We're going to talk about A&M and Gainesville against Florida. Billy Napier under the gun like nobody else. Mike Elko, it's a fresh new day in College Station. They played Notre Dame really tight and tough. And then, I think Notre Dame's experience probably got them in the end when they made the one big play of the entire game in that one. Florida is 2 different squads. They're a different squad with Graham Mertz than they will be with DJ Lagway. And I can only say that based on the one start that DJ Lagway had, albeit against Samford, Graham Mertz would not have thrown for 400 yards against Samford. That he just would not have done that. So now we've got a quarterback situation in Gainesville where, you're going to see probably some DJ Lagway if he's not going to start and play the whole game because we don't know about Graham Mertz's availability yet. And then Connor Wegman on the injury report last night is 50-50. So where does this change this game? This is one that, as a novice sports bettor, I would just stay away from completely because there's too many X factors in it that would mess me up one way or the other.
Yeah, when people say if you have 2 quarterbacks, you have none. Well, it seems like you have 3 quarterbacks in this game, and also you have none. Between Wegman, Lagway, Mertz, I have no idea really what to do here. I'll say one funny fact is not in the legal markets, but in some of those other ones, they have certain props like first coach to be fired. Billy Napier's minus 250 in the favorite. I don't think that is a shock to anybody, but that is the situation that Florida finds themselves in. So again, I'm not going to go through everything you just said because I would prefer Lagway. If I knew he was going to play the entire game, I think Florida's a little bit frisky. I think they have a better dynamic offense. The line opened at 4 for Texas A&M on the road, down to 3.5. Now I liked Texas A&M in the Notre Dame game until I flipped sides betting live midway. Now I'm telling myself, well, I don't want to lay the points on the road with Florida. I just don't think I have a right read on the Texas A&M team in terms of what I thought I would see in that game and now what they look at now. The one thing I will say about Florida is the significance of them being this bad continues to be just a wild stat in general, because it's been over 30 years since Florida had 3 home games or more as an underdog in a single season. Long season to go, they're already at 2. So it just this season is going to go one complete direction for Florida, and I think they're going to get lucky at times. Everyone's betting A&M, but the lines come down. So I would, if anything, like Florida on that 4. It's also worth noting totals down 3 points as well. I think everyone's just going to assuming this is going to be a bit of a crap show. So I'm
looking forward to watching it on Saturday, but I'm not in the kind of way like, ooh man, like I would be TCU and UCF. Really looking forward to that game. A&M in Florida, it's going to be one of those things that it's like a car wreck. You're going to be like, oh, this is fantastic. This cool thing happened. And then oh man,
it's meme of the 2 dumpsters going down, in flames. It's just, this can't be pretty one way or the other. I'm not, different TV. Not something I want to see.
Yeah. Let's talk about November rivalry games in September, the Apple Cup and the Civil War. Wazoo last week blew the doors off of Texas Tech, which I have a feeling is going to happen a couple more times to them this season with that defense. Washington, completely new team. I mean, as new a team as you could maybe ever get in college football, that's the Washington Huskies this year. New conference, new coach, almost a completely new roster because everybody graduated or went to the league. So they're really hard to peg. Oregon struggled a bit the first couple weeks, but won. Oregon State's 2-0, but they're not explosive or spectacular. How do you see these games? And are there good bets to make on these?
I got more to say on Civil War, so I'll be short on the Apple Cup here. So this line with Washington State's been all over the place. Look ahead was 8.5 for Washington, went down to 4.5, up to 5.5. Our models show about 6. Now, obviously, you have Finch going from Arizona to Washington. Like you said, completely different team. But Finch's offense did destroy Washington State's defense last year. 44 points, 500 yards, plus. I kind of like Washington in the game. I took it at that 4.5 number. I'd play it up to 6. 6 is where I'd say, hey, let's back off and watch the Apple Cup. So that's the one there with Washington. Civil War is super interesting just because how bad Oregon's played leading up to the game and kind of where the market already sits them. So I'll give you a stat. Oregon won by 10 points or less and were favored of 10 points or more in their first 2 games of the year. That's only happened right now with Oregon and Florida State. Obviously, Florida State losing one of those games, but in the same spot. That hasn't happened for any team since 2021. And then you think about this. In that third game, after those 2 close calls as big favorites, Oregon's line of 16 against Oregon State is the biggest for any team in that spot since 2006 Alabama. So in terms of how the market is talking about Oregon, the Idaho game, the Boise game, these big lines, these very short wins, and then it's just coming out and saying, hey, the line was 20.5, look ahead, now down to 16, but the spread is still 16. Interesting that 2006 Alabama team lost 7 games that year. So is Oregon going to lose 7 games? Of course not. But expectations-wise, completely just never met them that season, which is interesting nonetheless. Now, talk about the actual game in terms of Civil War. The line's humongous. You never see this line with Oregon State, who is 17-2 straight up, 16-3 against the number at home since 2021. They are best team in the country, cover machine in that spot. I'm not sure what to do here except take the points with Oregon State. And I did it above that 17 number. Under that 17, I just sit back and watch. Because of that, there's not too many key numbers in college, especially with like so many different circumstances and things. It's not really the NFL game, but 17 seems important and you know it.
All right, let's just kind of want to rapid fire through a couple of teams that are pointed up, pointed down, pointed like in the nebulous area here. Colorado appears like they're going to be a team that's going to be difficult to peg week to week because they kind of have I like to call it the Indiana Jones offense, where there's not really a plan, but it works out. Like they got Shedeur back there, they've got the wide receivers. He's throwing the whip over on something and he's swinging over and it works. Like it just works. And then when there is a plan, it doesn't look very good. How do you see betting Colorado for here on out?
I'm almost always going to be betting against them just because almost always they're going to be inflated. They're going to be top 5, if not top 3 in total tickets in almost every book every single week because of the action they take. So in this example, Colorado State getting the 7.5, it probably shouldn't be that number. It's also Colorado State's Super Bowl. So I'm going to be touching that side, but looking at Colorado as like an outlook a little bit, their win total preseason 5.5. Now it's 4.5. So expectations down a tad. They're 40-1 to make the playoff. Their schedule really doesn't say much in terms of the future. They're 35th toughest, middle of the country. To me, they're a fade for me, though. It's just their number's always going to be inflated every week, especially as a favorite. So,
all right, Nebraska, who just took it to Colorado, appears pointed up, and their schedule is kind of favorable to them to win some games, and the way that they play, they can probably keep most games close too.
Yeah, 650 plus 650 to make the playoff right now. So definitely in a different distance in Colorado. 7.5 their win total preseason, now up to 8.5. So things kind of looking in the right direction, but schedule coming up. Alabama, USC, there's some tough games, at least initially there. So I assume it's going to come back a tad for Nebraska. So the way I would look at it is, if you're going to bet anything future-wise, I'd probably hold off for a minute.
All right. My beloved Florida State Seminoles are 0-2. They have a very tough non-conference game, their first non-conference game of the season, at home against Memphis, Mike Norvell's old team. This is Memphis's Super Bowl now. I mean, this is especially a team like Memphis that thinks that they can be in that G5 playoff spot at the end of the year. This would go a long way, even at 0-2 for Florida State. Long term for them, I know every single thing you can possibly know about this team, and I cannot peg how any week is going to go as long as DJU is the quarterback.
Yeah, favored by 6.5. And the funny thing is that look ahead was almost close to about 2 or 3 points. So Florida State is getting some action a little bit here. I would take Memphis if it got to 7, but you know what the outlook is. Their win total preseason was 9.5. Now it's 6. They're 50-1 to make the playoff. They were 3-1 favorites to win the ACC. They're now 65-1 to win the conference. It's just nothing needs to be told more than that. I think the most difficult thing is it's still going to be difficult. If they're the 4th toughest strength of schedule in the ACC the rest of the way. So it's still Notre Dame's on the schedule, Miami's on the schedule, Clemson's on the schedule. You still got tough stuff to go.
Yeah. Speaking of Notre Dame, their outlook changed greatly, I think, for a lot of people after last week, because upsets happen. But if you look at the offense against Texas A&M, you look at the offense against Northern Illinois, Mike Denbrock, who was brought in to revitalize that offense, doesn't seem to be running what their strengths are with Riley Leonard, who hasn't thrown a touchdown pass in a long time. So offensively, they're not going to be a juggernaut. Like, they're going to be ball control and those things. So what does that mean for them down the line?
So let's talk now and talk future for a second, because this game, probably the most interesting line of the entire morning on Friday. This is literally taking over betting right now in terms of the fact that this line was 12.5, even up to 13 as of, about 2 or 3 days ago, now down to 8.5 against Purdue. It is collapsing. A lot of people coming in on the Boilermakers. Notre Dame has a long way to go in terms of making the playoff. That's why they're only 3-1 after that big loss, because you can have losses in this new format and you can get there. But they can't lose to Purdue. So this week has to go a certain direction, and their offense, I think, as you mentioned it, has to show some sort of spark. Their strength of schedule is what it is. You know what it's like. They play the same teams every year. But to me, I think you probably want to get it now on Notre Dame in terms of like the 3-1 bet. It's only going to get better. At Purdue, Miami, Ohio, at home against Louisville, at home against Stanford, neutral Georgia Tech. Like, these are games they're going to win before they've got, I guess a tough Florida State game later, maybe the tough at USC. Those games are later. So the odds are only going to go down as long as they win these games, or the season's just over.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Last thing before we go.
Sure.
Are there odds on who is the next team to join the Pac-12?
There's no odds out of the market or anything, non-legal on any of those things. Obviously, you've seen the news. So Boise, Colorado State, Fresno State, Oregon State, San Diego State, Washington State. Those are the new kind of members. I think when you look at actually different teams into these different conferences, the only things that make sense to me are like the Stanfords, SMUs, and Cals potentially going back to the Pac-12, or you look at like UNLV or Air Force. But right now, no odds, nothing like that in terms of who would go there next. I think the most interesting thing is just performance and trying to figure out, like, okay, is any of this actually impacting teams? The only thing I look at from like a gambling point of view is travel. Some of the travel right now is absolutely bonkers. Having a Cal and Stanford in the ACC, Oregon, USC, UCLA, Washington in the Big Ten has kind of turned some opportunities, let's call it.
Yeah, I would say, especially towards the end of the year for Cal and Stanford, to have to go to the Carolinas, to Florida, to Georgia, like the 4th or 5th time they have to do something like that, like it feels like that could really be a strain.
Yeah, and like keeping students in certain places, like having to travel back and forth in classes, it has literally become way more of a mess than I think we realize. So I do think you're right. It'll have an impact, just not yet.
Evan Abrams, Action Network. Evan, run down the stuff that you guys have going on and that you throw in the machine every week.
Yeah, well, I would just tell people actionnetwork.com, Action Network app, all the picks, all the data, all the research, everything is in the app and on the website. Me, myself, I'm on podcasts every Sunday night and Tuesdays. Action Network podcast, just searching on all your platforms. And I've got articles up all the time. Just search me on Google and you'll find my page, all my articles. And I'm Evan H. Abrams on Twitter. So
There you
find me
go.
out there.
It's great stuff all the way around. In 2 weeks, I feel like I'm much smarter. Next time we're in Vegas, I'm gonna finally walk up to a sports book and confidently make a bet. I'm gonna do that.
Can't wait. I'll walk you through it. Just shoot me a text.
Okay, good deal. All right, Evan Abrams, Action Network. Evan, we'll talk to you again soon.
See you later.
That's Evan Abrams, Action Network. Kenneth Davis, Big Ten country, coming up next. This is 365 Sports.